Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Topics with Mr. Javadi. Today, boy, do we have a treat today? Put on your shoes because we're going to go for a walk down that memory lane with the rock group called The Shoes. And so it's rock and roll, metaphorically, rock and roll shoes I'm talking about. But it's just an awesome, awesome opportunity, this group from Chicago. But before I start with Jeff Murphy's blessing, who was one of the founding members of the Shoes, or are you the founding member?
Well, actually, no, I'm actually the interloper.
Oh,
Um,
okay,
John and Gary had the initial concept and the idea, and they started doing things. And then but I owned recording gear, so I kind
okay.
of infiltrated.
Well, anyway, with his blessing, I'm just going to say one thing about the very sad news about Charlie Kirk and his passing. Um, it really doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen, what side you're on. The Iranian American that I am, that the father that I had who brought me here from the old world, we came here because of freedom. And it doesn't matter what point of view you have, you got to respect the other person. And this type of activity is just, it's barbaric. And I'll be honest with you, it's dictatorial. In fact, a lot of statements about, Trump dictator goes on the air all the time. Let me tell you, this is a dictatorial act because a person who was speaking his mind got killed. And that's not right. And for those of you who are celebrating this, think again. There's a power up there that's watching all this. Just be aware of that. But anyway, thank you. God bless America and God bless the Shoes. We're going to start our talk about this wonderful group that I actually found the Shoes in I believe it was 81, 82, something like that. I got your album um, having to do with present tense, right?
Okay,
Present.
yeah,
Yeah, I got that album, and of course, you had those songs "Tomorrow Night" and um, "In My Arms Again." Those songs that we'll talk about here a little bit. But that's when I discovered you, listening to you in the best basement of my parents' house. Man, what a wonderful, wonderful sound! I thought to myself, and I just loved that album. I couldn't get over it. I kept playing it over and over, and I thought to myself, man, these guys are just there's something. They sound wonderful. And I'm a person who, anymore nowadays, I'll listen to Joan Armatrading. I'll still listen to some Beatles, um, Pink Floyd, groups like that. But your sound, I found kind of more like, the Joan Armatrading, the Bob Dylan, that type of sound. And I just loved it. I loved listening to it, and I just wanted to continue listening
great.
to the music that you had. So, without further ado, let me just turn it over to Jeff Murphy. Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about how it all began? Just give us a little biography, if you would.
Sure. Well, again, I'm Jeff Murphy. My brother John is the bass player in Shoes and singer and writer, and his high school buddy Gary Klebe, also singer, guitar player, songwriter. And the way the band started was a pipe dream. We all grew up on the music of what was coming from Chicago. We live about an hour north of Chicago, right along the shores of Lake Michigan, and so we were, weaned on that Chicago top 40 radio. And in the when the British invasion thing happened, we became that's when we kind of became aware of the outside world music. Other than that, before that, it was kind of novelty songs. That's what we knew of music was One-Eyed Purple People Eater and Yellow Polka Dot Bikini and Alley Oop. Though I mean, because we were young kids. But when the British invasion came along, it changed everything. I mean, culturally, musically, and folks like, I mean, kids our age and older, and when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, it was just a zeitgeist moment. It was a watershed thing. When you saw them, you were like, "What?" And if you look at films of that, what's interesting, not so much
Yeah.
the performance of the Beatles was, if you look at the audience and where the audience was at, and then when they show the band, they just looked like they were from a different planet. And that, like I said, it just was, it introduced this whole musicians are cool thing to us. So by the time we were in high school, like I said, John and Gary met in high school. They had some classes together and they got talking about music, and they shared the same ideas about what they liked. And so they started this, I'm going to call it a joke, but it was between the two of them. They would talk about this band that they were in, and the superstardom of being in a band and all that. And the funny thing is, none of us knew how to play any instruments. We had never had any music lessons. We didn't own any instruments, but we had a pretty vast record collection at that point. And when John and Gary got out of high school, Gary went to the University of Illinois down in Champaign. And John stayed and went to a local college, and they would converse back and forth in these letters, still joking about this band, Shoes, that didn't exist. So it became and this was in the early 70s, probably 73, maybe
Okay.
going into 74.
Yeah.
I was into stereo equipment. I always had a stereo and reel-to-reel tape machine. And in early 1974, I bought what was one of the first commercially available multi-track tape machines, where you could record 4 channels and record something on channel 1 and listen to that and play along with it and record something on channel 2, and it would be in time. You can't do that with a regular stereo tape recorder because of the configuration of the playback heads and the record heads. Anyhow, so I had that, and those guys were talking about this band. So when they wanted to record something, I had this recording gear. So we just all kind of started teaching ourselves how to play and sing and write and record based on what we heard, based on what we liked. I mean,
Hmm.
Ziggy Stardust was a big album about that time.
Yeah.
Big Star was a huge influence,
Right.
when those albums came out in 72 and 74. So we just started recording, and every song we learned something new on how to mix and record, and our gear was so limited. And we recorded over the years three, uh, I guess you'll call them, we call them albums,
Hmm.
which was our learning process. And when we did the fourth recording, by then I had moved out, got my first apartment, and we set the band up there, had the recording gear in the kitchen, and we started recording this album that became called Black Vinyl Shoes. And we were pressing up, we pressed up 1,000 copies, and we wanted to package it in a way that we would have liked as fans. So we put in uh, an iron-on transfer for your T-shirt, and
Yeah. Yeah.
a sticker, and a little poster that had pictures of the process and the name
Yeah.
of the song and who played what, just to and we sold it for $3 a piece.
Wow.
And that record changed our lives. That was the record. The press latched onto it. By then, like I said, that was our fourth album of songs that we did, and that was the one that changed us. And Greg Shaw, who had the press kind of discovered us at that point. The local first, it started out in the local press, but then it was kind of like a critic would write to us and say, who would like this? You should send a copy to this guy in North Carolina, or a copy to this guy in California. And Greg Shaw, who had a magazine called Bomp and a label called Bomp, latched onto it and contacted us and financed us to do our first single. So we re-recorded the song "Okay," which,
Okay.
which was on black vinyl, and then we wrote Gary, because we're very democratic. We don't want to have a leader, no one wants to lead, but no one wants to follow. It's a three-man stack race, you know? So because
Yeah.
John's song was, John had written okay, and a single only has two sides. The only way to represent all three writers was for Gary and I to write the flip side. So Gary and I got together and we wrote the song Tomorrow Night. And
It's
that,
a fabulous song. I love
thank
that
you.
song. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to another. Like I said, it was like the press just kept spreading out. Greg bought everything that we had left of Black Vinyl. If we had any copies left, he says, I'll buy everything. And he had a distribution overseas. So the overseas press started to latch on.
Hmm.
And then we were contacted by PVC, which was Gem Gem Imports, had a label called PVC.
Okay.
So we licensed the reissue of Black Vinyl Shoes because we only had 1,000 copies, and now we were out of that. So they reissued it in mid 1978, and by the fall of '78, record companies started calling. Seymour Stein from Sire, Candy Batiste from Elektra, and so we fielded those offers, and we ended up signing with Elektra, and went to England and recorded the Present Tense album, which you had referred to. We spent about 2 months. We recorded at Richard Branson's owned a studio called The Manor,
Wow.
which was
Talk,
on,
talk
yeah,
about talk about big time.
it
Yeah.
was great. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we worked with Mike Stone, who was an English engineer producer,
Yeah.
and Mike had kind of cut his teeth working with Roy Baker and doing Queen records.
Hmm.
So he was all about the back, harmony vocals, which was good for us.
Hmm.
And when we finished the album, Elektra was very gung ho into promoting it and doing all that. But what had happened when we were in England, this band from America called the Knack, the Capitol had signed, had a hit with My Sharona, which we had no idea. Like I said, we were over there, and when we came back, it was a weird sort of thing because people liked that song. It obviously was a big record. It was a hit record for them. But for a number of weird reasons, there was this backlash against anything that people associated with that style of rock, power pop, melodic rock, whatever you want to call it, music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that hurt us and bands like us. There were bands like 2020 and The Beat that came out around that time, and we all sort of got lumped into this category, which was really wrong. The first time Rolling Stone reviewed Present Tense, they grouped it in with 9 other albums by other bands. The Motels, the Pop, the Beat, the A's, the Reds, 2020, Shoes, they all sound the same. And it was like, come on. I mean, I'd never seen them do anything like that before.
Yeah. Because music is music, and you guys are music artists. And
Yeah, yeah.
anyway,
So
go ahead.
so
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
that was a difficult thing. And as things were changing, I mean, we progressed with Elektra. We had a great deal with Elektra, so we had a lot of freedom. But by the time we delivered our third album, the record company was in dire straits. Things, and no pun intended. They
Yeah.
people were getting fired, uh,
Yeah.
and when we came back from England at the end of '79, right before Present Tense was released, we filmed 4 videos for the European market because America didn't have a video outlet at that time, but Europe did. So we shot 4 videos, and crazy thing is, 2 years later, MTV comes on the air.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that, but anyway, go ahead. I will.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
they and they needed things to play. They needed videos, and we happened to have these 4 videos. Unfortunately, we were 2 years down the line. I mean, they were promoting a record that had come out in '79, and this is '81. We were working on the third album, for Elektra, which was Boomerang. But Elektra refused to finance any more videos because it was too expensive. They said MTV is a flash in the pan. It doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about it. and we were bringing in stacks of mail. Say, look at this, we're getting all this mail. It has to be from MTV. Nope, they wouldn't. They would not fund it, which was obviously a huge mistake. And people were started getting fired in the label because things weren't going well. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah,
were making bad decisions. And by the end of 1982, they contacted us and terminated our agreement, which we were in the middle of an option period, so they owed us one more record. So they bought us out of the contract, and we took that settlement and built our first commercial studio and
yeah.
started, that, and then we recorded the Silhouette album on our own, and went back to doing what we had always done, which was recording ourselves. Only that now we're
Yeah.
doing it back at home.
Well, I want to ask you, first of all, what jumps out at me is that as you were talking about, the technical aspect of things, it sounds like you were kind of gifted with that. I mean, you were messing around with equipment and doing things with machines and what have you. So it sounds like it was a natural transition to eventually have your own studio. Am I right on that, or not?
Yeah, very much so. I personally, I always loved electronics, and when I was 9 years old, 8 or 9,
Hmm.
I asked for a little tape recorder. They had these little portable, and this thing was only about maybe a foot long, and it was a portable reel to reel, had these tiny little reels, tape
Yeah,
recorder.
yeah,
And so I was always recording things. That's why I said I had a nice stereo and a nice turntable, and Gary was into that too. So so we taught ourselves how to record because, and like I said, while we were learning everything at the same time, how do you tune a guitar? How do you play a guitar? How do you sing? How do you write? And
yeah.
we used our record collection as uh, our petri dish, our control. We would listen and say, how did they get that sound? What did they do? And so to us, that was what we were competing with. We were trying to match those sounds, but we didn't have we had when we did Black Vinyl Shoes, we had the 4-track tape machine. We had 6 microphones, one compressor, and a Roland Space tape echo. And that was it. So we learned how to maximize, using those things. We had a sequence to record things in. So even though we only had 4 tracks, we would end up with a dozen different instruments because
Well,
we would, uh, if you read anything about when the Beatles were working on 4 tracks, what they would do is what they call reduction. We called them bouncing, where we would record something here on this channel, and this channel, and then combine all 3 of those and move it over to here. Now we could erase these 3, and this one had all that combination. The problem is once you mix them all together, you can't change it. So you've got to get your ratios correct. If the guitar is too loud to the bass or whatever, and then we would record a vocal here and a vocal here, and maybe bounce that over to here, and um, as that was bouncing over, add a tambourine. So we could get more instruments on a limited number of tracks so that it didn't just sound like 4 instruments. And the Beatles were doing a similar thing back in the 60s, but what they would do is they would use a completely different tape machine, and they would take all 4 of those channels and record it onto one channel of a fresh tape. And then they had,
right.
so unbeknownst to us, we were kind of doing the same type of thing of that bouncing, reduction, ping-ponging, whatever they called it. And we got pretty good at it. We got used to it. And so when we
Wow.
went into a real studio where we had 16, 24, 48 tracks to deal with, it was like heaven. Wow, we don't have to deal with that. We can just record things on a channel. Now, with digital, there's no limit. You can have 100 channels of instruments if you want.
Yeah, but that reminds me of the old days, and you might appreciate this. Those computer classes about Fortran, Pascal. I mean, man, that sounds technical to me. I mean, that's tough stuff. So what you guys were doing, that's just amazing. You were doing some high time engineering, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, we
Yeah,
were, and
yeah,
it was fun. I mean, again, we were just doing what we had learned we had to do to get it to sound the way we wanted it to sound. And when we went
yeah.
to England and we were working with Mike Stone, and then we mixed at Trident, which was again a world class room, you know, where the Beatles recorded "Hey Jude," and where that's the piano that Elton John used on his first three records,
Wow, wow.
and it was and the engineers when we would you know because we were always involved in we weren't just sitting back and playing, we were actively you know turning knobs and saying this is what I wanted to do because we knew the sound in our head. That was always what we would do. We'd write a song and then learn how to play the sound in our head, you know, whatever melody it was.
Yeah.
And they said to us, "You guys work like English engineers. You know, you have because you're not paying attention to if the needle's in the red or if you this is wide open. You know, you've got that turned up all the way. You just are going for a sound, which they liken to the way that they were doing things at the time, which was pretty cool to us. And
Wow,
so for
wow.
us over the years, we just learned it by having to do these things to realize what the songs could be. And we still love it. I mean, we get together. It's difficult to schedule because, as you know, as you get older, you have family obligations and different interests and things. But we still, when we get together, we just what came out today was this Raspberries tribute album called "Play On,"
Hmm,
and
hmm.
they had asked us to if we'd be do a song, so we did "Overnight Sensation," and we had a blast. Just getting together, just the three of us to get together is something we never get tired of. We
It,
love, we just love singing together and making each other laugh. It's always a fun time because we share the same type of sense of humor too. So we're always uh, um, having fun when we do it.
well, it's productive, it's positive, prolific. Those are the words that I come up with. But the other word that I come to as a former English teacher is dedication. You guys at high school, or was it at graduation? But it probably started before you graduated. But you
Yeah,
were
yeah.
you were talking about forming a band. You decided to form the band. How did that happen? And the other question I have on that dedication is, I think you promised each other you're going to learn the instruments. You didn't know any instruments.
No,
So that's dedication. You took what, 1 year or maybe more to learn the instruments, and then you come back together. So talk about that a little bit.
yeah, well, it was a kind of learn as you go situation.
Yeah.
The first recordings that we did, we call it heads or tails, and I had picked up a little record cutter, a 1950 Meisner record cutter. And you back in the day, you used to be able to go to a record store and go into a booth and sing, and they would record you, and they would cut you a disc, and you could buy it and take it home, and it was your voice on this. And a friend of mine had gone to a rummage sale and said, "Hey, there's this record cutter there. Are you interested?" I said, "Yeah." So I bought that, and that became a goal for us to be on vinyl as the
Mm.
band. So we never. I guess the embarrassing thing is we documented our learning process. Every one of those early records is a documentation. It wasn't like we said, "Oh, we're not good enough yet. We're going to learn how to play for 6 months or a year before we start recording." No, we would we were recording everything as we went along. And Heads or Tails was the first project that we did, and the disc, that little disc cutter that I had, it could record 10 minutes on each side. So we said, okay, let's do 10 songs. And they were 5 2-minute songs on one side of the disc and 5 2-minute songs on the other side of the disc. And I cut 4 copies, 3 or 4 copies. And
Wow.
they were really primitive. But again, that was our learning process. And then the next the record, uh, Gary had gone to school in France to study architecture for a year after we did the Heads or Tails recording. So John and I thought, let's surprise him. let's do another batch of songs, and we'll surprise him with a new record to show him how dedicated we are, how important this is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
John and I put together a record called One in Versailles, and this time we pressed up at an actual pressing plant. And what was a revelation at the time was my roommate, who I had moved out with, was a drummer, and which is why we moved out together, was because he was a good drummer, and we were using him at that point to
Mhm.
as our drummer. And he had played drums, so he knew how to do that. And more importantly, he had a record from his seventh grade marching band
Wow.
and I said, how, where did you get that? And he said, well, yeah, our marching band, we recorded it, and they pressed up records. So I checked it out, and sure enough, there were two pressing plants in Chicago, and you just send them your tape and you send them the money and you can press up records. And again, that was a revelation to us. So we were like, wow, let's press up some and surprise Gary. So
Wow.
we finished recording. Unfortunately, we couldn't get them done in time for Gary before he got back from France. But we had 300 copies of this record called One in Versailles, and it was just John and I. But we called it Shoes, and the drummer at the time, Barry. And when Gary came back, he was shocked. I mean, he was like, "Wow!" So he felt like he had to hit the ground running. So we started recording a new batch of songs, and that became Bazooka. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that was in 1975. So, like I said, each record we learned, we got a little bit better. We would invest more money in gear. Now we had electric guitars and actual amplifiers. We never had a set of speakers, so everything that we recorded and mixed, even Black Vinyl Shoes, was done completely on headphones. We didn't have didn't have speakers.
My goodness, that's something.
Yeah, so
I mean, yeah.
it was a progression, and for us, that's part of what made it fun. Was you got a little extra money because we were working jobs, so you'd buy a new microphone or a new guitar or a new amplifier, and it just kept progressing. And like I said, with Black Vinyl Shoes happened. By then we had the process down. We knew I had a chart of how to record things and how to move things, so we knew the order we had to do them in. We realized certain weird things would happen, like if you ping ponged, like I was talking about, moving things together, if you did that to the bass guitar, it got really weird sounding. So we said, okay, you can't do that to bass. But so that we wouldn't have one track with just bass guitar,
Hmm.
we might record a tambourine on that track. And
Yeah.
the reason we would do that is because if we made a mistake and didn't get the volumes right between the bass and the tambourine on that channel, you could go to your tone control, your equalizer, and turn up the high frequencies and make the tambourine louder, and it didn't really affect the bass. So we would combine things on channels that were on opposite ends of the frequency range, so that we had a little more control in mixing if we had made a mistake, three bounces ago.
See, I just love that. My dad, God rest his soul, was a mechanic, and you know, I saw him work on projects. He loved it. He didn't let the obstacle stop him. He loved it. He loved the challenge. He loved, like, one time it was a Porsche 911 somebody brought, and I think he worked on that thing 3 weeks, but he finally figured out what was wrong with it because he loved the challenge. He
The
loved,
challenge of it, yeah.
yeah. And it sounds to me like you guys are like that. You're very mechanical, if that makes sense, with music, and in a good way, because you want to get the technique right, you want to get the sound right, and all that stuff. And I just love that, and it just comes across to me as very authentic,
Yeah,
very dedicated. Now, let me go to this other question that I asked a little while ago. Um, Instruments. How did you learn it in 1 year, or was it 1 year? Was it 1 year and a half, or how long was it?
well, like I said, it was really um, a process of if Gary would discover, hey, this is how you play a bar chord. then he would show me. And if I discovered if you do this, here's a capo, you can put a capo. I was working as a printer at the time and got one of my fingers smashed in the machine. So
Oh,
I had a guard over that finger. So I thought, oh, I'll buy a slide bar. And so I started messing around with having a slide bar and playing slide guitar, which, if you listen to Black Vinyl Shoes, there's a song called Running Start. And it was using a slide, so these things, I don't want to call them, it was just that progression of learning, buying a guitar book to say, okay, so this is a G and this is a C and this is how I mean, even now we don't know how to read music, we don't know how to write music, but we'll say, that chord that you play where your fingers are like this, where you do that 4 times, you know.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
So that's and we all speak, all three of us, that's how we learn together. And we would start recording, say, okay, so let's record that. Let's do something. And so,
So you taught yourself, and
yes,
yeah.
yes. And then around 1975,
Uh-huh.
we became interested in live music. And even though we had done all this recording, we'd never played as a band live.
Uh-huh.
So in 1975, there was a club. We had to leave Zion, where we lived, was a dry town, no alcohol, which meant no bars, which meant no clubs, which meant no music scene. So we had to leave the city to try to find bands, see. And there was about 10 miles away, there was a club, and we would go there on weekends to see bands. And we saw this band, also from Illinois, called Cheap Trick.
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah,
it was their early days.
yeah.
Robin had just recently joined the band, and watching them live, it blew our minds.
Oh, they're awesome. Yeah.
They were awesome. And,
Yeah.
especially at that
Yeah.
early age, I mean, you never knew what Rick was going to do on stage.
Mhm.
And so that influenced us to want to want to play. I mean, obviously, we're completely different on stage. I mean, we're more kind of a stand and perform, where Rick is, he was manic. He was all over the place. But so we started playing shows. Our first show was first gig we ever played was in 1976. Um, that was with the drummer that I was my roommate at the time.
Hmm.
And after that show, uh, he he quit the band.
Okay.
So we had to get another drummer, and we started interviewing local drummers and looking for someone that had the right personality and the right fit. And Gary's sister had gone out with this guy who was playing drums in a local cover band. So John went to see him, and he said, I think he would be good. He's, very even keel and nice guy. And
That's great.
so
Yeah.
Skip Meyer joined us right before we started recording Black Vinyl Shoes.
Hmm.
And even at that, I mean, he was holding his sticks like drummers used to hold, with that kind of, Buddy Rich style of underhanded like this. And we
Hmm.
said, no, grab those sticks like this and really whack those drums, give us a John Bonham. And so we were constantly learning and trying things different, and because we taught ourselves, we learned things in such a weird way. And then somebody would say, oh, you're doing this, or you're playing a minor chord there. And I'm like, well, what's a minor chord? We still,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so we feel very lucky to have accomplished what we have. There was a writer from Chicago in a review. They said something like, we were too dumb to know that we couldn't succeed. And there was this ignorance, this bliss from being ignorant. The odds of a band signing from this dry little town in, Zion, Illinois.
By the way, I love the name. That's a great name.
Zion, yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason my family moved there was because in the early '60s, there was an electronics manufacturer that made
Mhm.
TVs for Sears. I don't know if you remember there was a department store called Sears and Roebuck,
Oh, yes, yes.
and they made Silvertone
I remember RCA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
my father worked at that electronics plant. So we moved to Zion. And, as kids growing up, we didn't know anything about the politics or the fact that it's a dry town or but as we got older, then, like I said, then you start seeing the handicap of what do you mean I can't do, like the stores would all close on Sunday. No stores were open on Sunday.
Yeah.
Cigarettes used to be illegal in town. Any form of tobacco was illegal in town. Movie
Hmm.
theaters were illegal in town. It was a weird, it was a weird, but as a kid, you don't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as we grew up and to think that we wanted to make music, get signed to a major record deal was such a pipe dream.
Hmm.
But we just kept our heads down and we just kept moving forward. And like that critic had said, we didn't know that you couldn't, there was no way we were going to succeed, but yet we just kept going and it happened.
Um, Let me kind of get back to your music just a little bit.
Sure.
Talk to me a little bit about Tomorrow Night and In My Arms Again. What was the process behind getting those songs? Because they're just fabulous songs.
Oh, thank you.
How did you come about writing them? Was it the lyrics first? Was it the guitar chords first? How did you come across that?
It varies depending on the song. Sometimes you're just sitting noodling on a guitar and you come up with something that you like, and you go, "Oh, that I like that." And so for us, we like because we can't write music. There was the only way to remember it was to record it, was to get it
Hmm.
down on tape. So oftentimes it just comes from that. You're just doodling along. Um, with Tomorrow Night as an example, uh, like I said, because we Gary and I wanted to write the song on the flip side of that single for Greg Shaw. I had started this song based on this riff that I was working on. I called it Wonder Wax just to have something in my brain that connected it. And I had this kind of jangly rich riff thing. And so when we decided to write a song together, that became sort of the framework. Okay,
Yeah.
here's this riff.
Hmm.
So literally, Gary, and we never done this before, and we don't do it very often, which is we actually sat together and Gary and I and started hacking it out. Just like playing this, and well, how about you go to that chord here? Okay, we'll do that. And usually it's more where somebody comes in with a more complete structure and idea and maybe has lyrics together and melody. But in this case, we just kind of, did it together. I wrote the words on that,
Hmm.
the lyrics, and then Gary and I worked out the instrumentation and the changes. And it was somebody said to us one time, so when during the break when it goes dun 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 dun, dun,
Yeah.
he said, "Yeah, it really is one of those things where one guy plays the first bit and the other guy goes, oh, well, how about this then?" And so you play the counter line to it. Um, so that's where that song came from, was that collaboration. We tend to like to have a goal. If there,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like a carrot on a stick, a reason to do something.
You set a goal. Yeah.
Yes, which is why I think in recent years there's been more time between records because, like you had said, we're and that now that you record on into a computer, that's all gone. There's no meters or flashing lights and reels and motors and electronics. You plug into a box
Hmm.
and you push a button and then you play your thing. And if the box worked, it saves it. If the box doesn't work, oh well, you got to find out what happened. It's not as much. It's not as romantic. It's not as tangible, and that's frustrating to us. But it offers a lot of great advantages. The editing is fantastic. Like I said, you have no limits on how many tracks you can have. So it offers all these great benefits, but there still is something for us, even the smell of recording tape. Different brands of tape had a very distinct aroma because of the different adhesive that they use to make the tape. You could walk into a studio and you could tell what brand of tape they were using by the different smell and
Yeah.
the tangibility of all that was the tactile, turning a knob, you know,
Yeah.
was so we've always had studios. We and ours was a commercial studio. We built a commercial studio after we split with Elektra in 1983. We built a studio and started producing other bands because
Well, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, because you've got this
Yeah.
gear, you might as well use it to its maximum. So it helped finance the expansion of the studio as we brought more bands in, and they would pay us to record them. That would afford us the luxury of, oh, we can buy a new reverb unit, or we can buy a new delay, or whatever. So in 2004, we could see that digital was coming, and we decided to sell that studio, and we did. We got out of it, and and then we went digital, and Gary and I built recording studios in our homes where we can do things. This is mine, and Gary has one, and so we record. Now it's like I said, it's a different approach, but it's not that alien for us because we were so used to working at home and doing demos and like for instance, the Present Tense album, we had completely recorded that album in its entirety in our own demo studio before we went to England and re-recorded it for Elektra.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and we released that as there's a CD that we released a few years ago called Double Exposure. And that's what that is. It was the demos for Present Tense, and then the demos that became the second album for Elektra, Tongue Twister. And and you can see we had things pretty much figured out what we were going to do when we went into the professional studio. We just wanted it to be done with better quality. And now with digital, you can get that quality at home. I mean, Billie Eilish recorded the album. She won 6 Grammys recording it in her bedroom with her brother. I mean, that's where the technology is.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Uh, what I want you to talk about now, if I may, is the studios you had, how many of them you had, and the albums one by one, their name, and a little bit about each album. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the Heads or Tails record, which I'm going to start there because to us that's our first recording. We did that in
Mhm.
my parents' basement, so there was no
Okay.
name for it. Uh, and then I moved out into this it was a converted garage, actually, is what it was. It was a little flat, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and the place was jammed with gear. We stored our gear there. We rehearsed our for live shows there. We had the recording gear set up in the kitchen, and we had the living room was full of drums and amps and guitars. And then we would go, string a microphone into the bedroom if we needed to have some isolation between the guitar and the drums or whatever.
Hmm.
And we started calling that place La Cabane, or
La Cabane.
the
So that
cabane,
was that was
La
a
Cabane.
studio. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's where we finished one of Versailles there. John and
Hmm.
I did, and then when Gary came back, we did Bazooka completely at La Cabane, and then we did all of Black Vinyl Shoes at La Cabane. And then in 1978, Black Vinyl Shoes came out in '77, and again there was progress. So we started making some money from record sales and starting to play live. We decided to rent an official clubhouse. Well, we rented the basement of a business down in downtown Zion and set up our recording gear and our live so we could rehearse there. There we never named that place. It was underneath this bridal shop, a woman's bridal shop called Fields. So yeah, that was where we recorded all the demos for Present Tense and Tongue Twister and Boomerang. All those demos were done in that basement. And then when we split with Elektra in '83, we built our own commercial studio where we actually started hiring the studio out, and that became Short Order Recorder.
Short order recorder. Okay.
short order recorder. And we were at that location for about 3 years.
Wow.
And then we outgrew it. You know, it was a little strip mall, and we were making too much noise for the neighbors. So, and the thing is, the three of us physically built that studio, hammered,
Oh,
nailed, cut the boards. We did all the electrical. We did everything, laying the carpet,
wow.
putting in the ceiling. We did everything.
I don't
And
know if I've ever heard that. That's awesome.
yeah, and because Gary, Gary had gone to school for architecture, so
Yeah.
he knew how to design it on paper, and we just went to town and built it. So then, like I said, by the time we decided we have to move out of this building, we found another building in Zion that we ended up buying, and Gary again designed that studio. I had we by then we had been in enough studios around the world, I guess, to know what we liked. We worked at a studio called United Western in Los Angeles, which was historic. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was a hugely important recording studio in the
Kind of an icon in a way.
yes.
Yeah.
And that became a studio called Ocean Way, and we worked there for 3 months. And it's like I said, we mixed it at Trident in England. We recorded at the Manor. So we got to see what other studios did and take the bits that we liked and said, okay, let's put a table, behind the where the engineer sits, at the console, and let's do what's called a live end, dead end type control room, and we liked Yuri 813 monitors, so we bought a pair of 813 from one of the ex Eagles, and we built those into our studio. And so, like I said, it was always this progress of learning, and again, hammering, nailing. We built the whole thing. So that was also called short order recorder. But now we had bought a 16 channel tape machine, because I guess I omitted the fact to say that back in '78, when we moved out of La Cabane, when we moved out of there and rented our first official space, we also bought an 8 channel tape recorder.
Mm.
So we had more tracks. And then when we built our first studio after Electra, we bought a 16 channel tape machine, which was all we could afford at the time. But when we recorded with Electra, when we recorded the Tongue Twister album and the Boomerang album, we were using two 24-track tape machines synchronized together. So we had 48 channels to record on.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And when we built our own studio, we had to kind of scale back to 16 track, because now you only have 16 channels, because we couldn't afford like those places. I mean, they were spending $50,000 on one tape machine. We didn't have that kind of
Yeah.
financing.
Yeah.
So we always had to find ways to maximize the amount of things that we had. We knew there were certain pieces of gear we saw in every studio. Every studio had a Neumann microphone. Okay, we'll buy a Neumann microphone. Every studio had Shure SM57 microphones and Sennheiser 421 microphones. Okay, we'll get some of those so we have enough to do the drum kit. And it was that process of bit by bit adding, and then some of the bands that we recorded went on and to become signed on their own. The material. I produced the first 2 albums for Material Issue, which were on Polygram. We did all the demos and helped them get signed. A band called Local H, which they signed to Island, and they were two guys from Zion as well. And
Awesome.
in the process, we had, going back into our early days, one of John and Gary's high school buddies, his cousin was in a band from Madison, Wisconsin, which is not that far away.
Yeah.
And so he introduced us, and we got to know them. That was a band called Spooner. And so they asked us if we would, because by then we had, considerable recording experience on our own and also at these other studios. They asked us to help them with their recording, their single, their EP, this band Spooner. And they were always when we built our 16-track studio, they built an 8-track studio in Madison, and Gary kind of helped them. Well, the drummer of Spooner was this guy named Butch Vig,
Mm.
and we stayed friends with Butch over the years, and Butch obviously became tremendously successful as a record producer himself,
Wow.
and produced Nirvana, Nevermind. He produced Smashing Pumpkins, Siamese Dream. He produced
Oh, wow.
Freddie Johnston. He and the guitar player who was the cousin of our high school pal. The two of them had done a band on their own called Garbage, and that became successful. So it was it was great for us to see, to witness and learn and be around these people that were seeing success. It was really exciting, and
That's great.
and now the industry has changed so much that it's not the same kind of. Now you do a file, you send a file, you do a download. There's nothing
Yeah.
there's no plastic involved.
Yeah. I watch Rick Beato quite a bit, and Rick Beato talks about that very same stuff, that what a
Yeah,
change there's been. And
yeah,
I like Rick. So, Rick, if you're watching, thank you.
yeah. He
Yeah.
did an interview with Butch,
Oh, did he?
and
Yeah.
in the interview, he asked Butch why did they go to Sound City to record the Nevermind album,
Yeah.
and Butch says, well, Gary Kleeb from Shoes said Neve consoles are the best, so I went
Yeah.
down there because they had a Neve console.
Yeah.
And he ended
Yeah.
up buying that console. I
Yeah.
mean, or Dave Grohl did end up buying that console.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's funny how in a way we feel sort of a kinship to all those guys
Bet. You bet.
because of just we all kind of, I don't want to say came up together, but we're influenced by the same things.
Okay. The albums, uh,
Yes.
one by one, just list them and
Okay.
discuss them briefly if you can. Yeah.
Heads or Tails was the first thing we did.
Uh huh.
One of Versailles was 300 copies of that, which this has been reissued a couple of different times. Bazooka was released for the first time in vinyl in 2012 by a label out of Chicago called the Numero Group. That was the recording that we did when Gary came back from France in 1975. 1996 and 1976 and 77, we recorded Black Vinyl Shoes. That was the fourth track recording. Then we signed with Elektra. We did Present Tense in England. Then in 81 or 80, we did Tongue Twister for Elektra, where we worked with Richard Dashett, who had done Fleetwood Mac's Rumors album, and we recorded it at United Western in LA, and we mixed at the Village Recorder in the Fleetwood Mac room where Fleetwood Mac had just recorded Tusk there. And then we did Boomerang in Chicago at the Chicago Recording Company, which had this great Italian recording console made by a company called Cadac, which was really cool. And it was a great studio and a great experience. And that one we produced ourselves at that point. Unfortunately, while we were recording it, we could see the record company was in trouble. They were crumbling. And when we flew out to LA with the finished tapes for that Boomerang album, the vice president who had signed us to the company, we were the first band he ever signed, he heard that he was going to get fired. And so he went into the chairman of the board from Warner Brothers and confronted them and said, I've heard this rumor. And they reassured him and said, no, you've got nothing to worry about. And we came home. That was in August. We came home, and that record came out, I think, in September. And by December, a couple weeks later, he was fired. And so we knew we were dead in the water because they're going to have a regime change.
Yeah.
And so that was at the end of that year. Then they terminated the contract. So we recorded Silhouette on our 16 track. and that was only released on vinyl in England, Germany, and France on 3 different labels.
Okay.
It was never released at the time in America.
Hmm.
Then we recorded. Then we built the new studio. We moved Short Order Recorder and recorded Stolen Wishes
So,
at the new Short Order Recorder. That was still on 16 track. And at the time, again, technology, one way, having come from having 48 channels to record on when we were doing the Elektra records to now on 16, we were trying to find ways to get more instruments on such,
mhm.
you know, because it wouldn't be uncommon to use a dozen channels just for drums, bass
Yeah,
drum,
yeah.
snare drum. So we were trying to figure out a way to maximize that. And this, again, was newer technology. Computers were starting to have music programs.
Hmm.
So we realized that we could record the drums on electronic pads and store that in the computer, and we would only use one channel of the 16 track machine
Hmm.
for a track that had a time code that would sync the computer to it.
Hmm.
So that way the drums were stored in the computer, and we still had 15 channels on the tape machine to record all the other instruments and vocals. So that's how Stolen Wishes was done. Looking back on it, it was kind of, we feel bad for what we put the drummer through, but that was the way we had to do it. Record these. Uh, then when we went to the next record, we bought a 24 channel tape machine, and we recorded the Propeller album.
Hmm.
Then that was the last studio album at Short Order Recorder.
Hmm.
Then when we went digital, um, we recorded Ignition combination. I would do stuff at my house, and then we did the majority at Gary's studio, which we call Cellar Dweller.
Yeah.
My studio, I just called the Studio. And so that's kind of the progression, I should say. It's funny
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
started at home and now we're back at home, and only now the gear is so much better.
Yeah.
You know that we and I mean, I was have been doing some songs with people that were not even in the same country. I mean, I was working. I don't know if you know the band Velvet Crush, but Paul Chastain, who plays in Velvet Crush, lives in Japan, and he contacted me back during the pandemic and said, "Hey, you want to write some songs together?" And I said, "Okay." So we would just trade files back and forth,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we've recorded a couple of songs doing that, which it wouldn't have been possible the old technology. So
Yeah.
there's good and bad in both ways of recording.
Right. Right. Well, speaking of, and I'm starting to. I always say, the plane is about to land, so fasten your seatbelts. So so I'm about to finish. We're about. Conditions look good, so we're about to land.
Okay.
But trying to wrap up here. But one thing I wanted to ask you, there's this. I sense there's this British connection. Is there a reason for that? I mean, are you guys British in relatives or anything like that, or no?
No, no, I think I attribute that to the fact that we were so influenced by the British invasion when that whole music wave came after the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Kinks, all that had such an impact on us that
Hmm.
to us that was sort of ground zero
Hmm.
for our musical. But it really didn't. I mean, we weren't really so much into the American rock and roll, uh, the early rock and roll, like Chuck Berry or Elvis or any of that. It was the Beatles that really kind of gave us that awakening.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, there's a lot of great bands making. I guess I don't know what you want to call this genre. They've started calling it power pop, which
Hmm.
I guess is kind of accurate. We always called it melodic rock, but people like Tom Petty, to our definition, it's
Yeah.
just melodic rock. So it's a
Yeah.
very wide category. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, even a band like Fleetwood Mac. I mean, "Go Your Own Way." That's a power pop song to us, but
Yeah.
a band like ELO. I mean, we love
Or
all that stuff.
or Bob Welsh, you know.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Fountains of Wayne, was
yeah,
a great band. Big
yeah,
Star, of course. Now they were American, so those were all influences. We're a melting pot of all of that.
yeah, you bet. Okay, Jeff, thanks so much. And now I'm going to go to the question that I generally always ask. Sometimes I skip it. But, being a former teacher, some kids may be watching, there may be a high school kid watching. If there's young people out there watching who are thinking about going your path, but they don't quite have that confidence, do you what do you advise them? Because it's a different world out there, but what do you advise them?
It absolutely is. The
Yeah.
the best advice I could give would be to say, if we can do it, anyone can do it. I mean,
Yeah.
we started from ground zero. Didn't know how to play, we didn't know how to sing, record, any of that, but we just loved it so much, and that's why you do it. You really don't do it because you want. I mean, of course there's the girls, and you have dreams of making a lot of money, and for us, it was not even so much about the fame. I mean, it wasn't, we didn't, we're not really comfortable to be the center of attention, to be on stage. We do that, it's fun, but it's a lot of work. But the advice would be just believe in yourself. Our motto was always, it's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees.
Oh,
And
wow. Wow. What a quotation. Yeah. I'm
because
going to quote that if you don't mind.
well, it was to us, that was
Yeah.
part of what we
Yeah.
saw, as a political statement from like South American countries. That was sort of their mantra, and we thought, that's what we were musically. Was record companies would say, "Oh, you got to do this and you got to do that," and we always trusted our own instincts because that's what makes you unique. If you're
Mm.
going to do something because somebody else told you to do it, you're not going to feel like it's your success. Or worse, if you fail, you're going to say, "What would have been if I had followed my own advice and trusted my own instincts?" So be true to yourself. That's the key.
Get the experience however you can, right? I mean, go
Yes,
go be with maybe other
absolutely,
musicians, and it's yeah, okay.
absolutely,
Well, Jeff, if people want to reach out to you, are you open to that? What would be the best way?
absolutely. Well, our website is Shoeswire, like shoeswire.com. And there's a email. You can email us at contact@shoeswire.com, and we see that daily, and we'll respond. Also, there's all of our catalog is there, merchandise, and when we have something special, we don't post as often as we should. But if we have something new that's happening that we're doing, we post it on there. They can sign up for our email list. Uh, but again, it's you have to kind of bide your time. If you spend too much time doing social media, it's less music that you're recording.
So true. Well, I don't know. I can't thank you enough. I mean, it's been marvelous. So
Thank you. It was fun.
thanks for the time, and please give my best to the family and to the band.
I will do
Um,
that.
Best of wishes in the future projects. Ladies and gentlemen, just go to their website. These people are busy. Just look at their projects that are coming up. But I love that about you guys. You're kind of like football, the fundamentals. You got to love the fundamentals in football.
Yep. Yeah.
You're not always going to be John Elway, but you got to love the fundamentals, and that's what does it. That's what does it. The basics.
Yep.
And you guys are like that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Bye bye.
Bye bye.